Garden Basics with Farmer Fred is brought to you by Smart Pots, the original lightweight, long-lasting fabric plant container. It's made in the USA. Visit smartpots.com/Fred for more information and a special discount. That's smartpots.com/Fred. Welcome to the Garden Basics with Farmer Fred podcast. If you're just a beginning gardener or you want good gardening information, well, you've come to the right spot. Yes, it's August and it's hot out. Still, there's plenty of work in the garden despite the heat. There's harvesting fruits and vegetables, more diligent irrigation, deadheading those flowering annuals, perennials, and shrubs, and pulling weeds, of course. And wise gardeners throughout the country have added another chore that will help guarantee future garden success: summer pruning of deciduous fruit trees. We'll tell you why now nipping back your peach, plum, apple, apricot, cherry, nectarine, and other fruit trees that will be leafless in a few months will lead to better production next year. Have you heard of lemon verbena? It's an herb which can get 5 or 6 feet tall. It has showy early summer flowers, and it produces leaves that can liven up a lot of your dessert recipes with a taste that your guests won't forget. And since it's summer, there are summer tomato issues to contend with. We revisit from episode 127 tips for dealing with August tomato pests and diseases, as well as too much sun and heat. We're podcasting from Barking Dog Studios here in the beautiful Abutilon Jungle in suburban Purgatory. It's the Garden Basics with Farmer Fred podcast, brought to you today by Smart Pots and Dave Wilson Nursery. And we'll do it all in about 30 minutes. Let's go. We like to answer your garden questions here on the Garden Basics podcast. We always turn to America's favorite retired college horticultural professor, Debbie Flower, to help us out in this conundrum. And Steve from Rockland, California writes in. Rockland is in Placer County, California, and he writes in about his peach, nectarine, and plum trees. He says, I've been trying to keep them manageable, and they are really sprouting out a lot of new limbs and thus are getting taller and wider. And now, before harvest, I was wondering if pruning the non-fruit producing limbs is okay to do, or should I wait until winter after the leaves fall? Debbie, there is certainly a move afoot to do when it comes to deciduous fruit trees like nectarines, peaches, and plums, to do a lot of summer pruning. Mm-hmm. And I can't disagree with that.
Right. Same here. Because that helps. Pruning is always a dwarfing process, but the plant in summer has not had all the time it can take to make food and stash it in the roots and the stems over the winter. And that food that's stashed is used to regrow in spring. And so if you cut off some of its ability to make food in the summertime, it reduces the amount of food it stores, not so that it dies, unless you prune way too much, but it reduces the amount of food it stores, and so your regrowth in spring is smaller.
There are a lot of good reasons to prune in the summertime. And one of the best is, as Steve used the perfect word, manageable. Keep the tree at a size that you can reach the fruit from the ground without having to get on a ladder for your own safety.
Ed Livo, who's you've heard, I'm sure, on Fred's show, I attended a talk he gave once, and he stood in front of the room with hand shears in his hand, and said, the best height for your fruit tree is this. And he raised his hand above with the pruner in it above his head, and that was the height. Whatever that is for you.
Exactly. That is the perfect height to keep your trees. And yes, you will have a bountiful supply of fruit. Just because you're keeping that tree 6 or 7 feet tall and wide doesn't mean you won't have enough fruit to feed your family.
One thing that Steve says is he wants to remove the non-bearing branches. And that sounds like a great idea, but I'm wondering where those non-bearing branches are. I have an apricot tree, and for me, some of the non-bearing branches are, at least most of them are, very low on the tree, where I'd love to see fruit because I can just walk by and pick it. And the reason they're non-bearing is there's a branch above them that is shading them. And so my pruning on this apricot will be to remove the large branch above that is shading the branches below so that I can get more sun to those lower branches and they will produce fruit. I have to be very careful, though. I will do it probably in the next week or two. My apricot is a very early bearing apricot, and it is completely finished having fruit. So I'm in that after harvest season, but I have to be very careful with the wood that is newly exposed to sun. And I'm going to have to probably paint. I either have to wrap it with some paper or paint it with a wash 50% interior latex paint in a light color and 50% water to reflect the sun that is now all of a sudden going to be hitting these pieces of wood. Otherwise, I could get sunburn.
And where would you make the cuts when you're pruning that fruit tree in the summertime? Generally speaking, too, by the way, you do it twice a year. You do it once when you're thinning the fruit in the springtime and then after harvest in the summertime.
Mm-hmm. I want to make one cut. I want to make what's called a thinning cut, which is removing the branch at its origin. And there's a place, I've been out there multiple times, as you can imagine, examining this tree from the ground. There's a place where there's a Y, 2 branches split off from one. They're both strongly attached, but only one is hanging out over the lower branches. And I will go back to that Y where the one branch is attached and take it at that location. I'll take the whole thing.
Do you have to worry about going into the branch collar for a branch like that or not?
In that case, there will be a collar where the two meet. Well, there will be a branch bark ridge where the two meet. I need to be careful. It's an apricot in my case, which needs to be pruned during dry weather only. If it's too humid or we're getting rain, then we could get a disease called eutypa in that plant. It's called dead arm, and it will kill the entire branch. So this is a good season for that. But I want to leave the branch bark ridge. If I were cutting a branch back to a major trunk and there was a collar, and you have to know what the collar looks like, then yes, I want to preserve the collar.
The collar looks kind of like a turtleneck collar. It just kind of sticks out from the bigger branch, and that is where the Band-Aid for that branch is. So if you removed that branch collar, you're slowing down that plant's chance to heal. Right. So you want to just make that cut just slightly out from that bigger branch. And what's great, too, when you're removing a branch that way, the thinning cut, it's going to spur quicker growth on new buds for the next year.
Mm-hmm. Hopefully, because I'm doing it so early, and some may say too early, but I think for my tree it's fine, I will still get fruiting buds on the lower branches. It will stimulate their production. I will also go in, though, there are some very tall upright sprouts. I wouldn't call them water sprouts. They're not that vigorous. A water sprout is an upright sprout that grows really fast and really thick. And they tend to be vegetative only for years before they start bearing fruit. Most of these are fruit-bearing, but they are going straight up, and I don't want to get that high. I don't want the plant to get that tall. And so in the Home Orchard, which is a University of California Ag and Natural Resources publication, Chuck Ingalls, our recently deceased, unfortunately, but very knowledgeable, wonderful guy, Chuck Ingalls writes that peach and nectarine, you should remove 50% of last year's growth.
And I know he always used to advise, too, especially with cherry and apricots, to do your pruning by mid-August to thwart the possibility of rain-driven diseases like the eutypa you mentioned.
Yes. You know, we can get hot around here, and I don't love working in that heat, so I'm going to do it while we have a respite in the heat here.
And what's nice, too, is that summer pruning controls the growth rate of the plant, which is if you're trying to keep that plant at a manageable height, that's going to make it a heck of a lot easier, and you won't need as much winter pruning.
Right, and if you also open it up and there are diseases or insects that may be attacking your plant, opening it up helps control those diseases.
Right.
And insects.
Now, Steve mentioned that these fruit trees are rather young. They're only 2 years old. And so you're still in the formation stages of that plant. So we're talking about controlling the overall height of the plant, and a plant in its second year. If it's going to bear fruit, it might have only 1 or 2, if that. You got to wait till year 3 or even year 5 before you see what that tree will eventually do. So you're still shaping the tree.
Right. Determining which branches you're going to keep and which branches you're not. So maybe the non-bearing ones are higher up in the ground. They may be vegetative. It takes time for a branch to become fruitful.
So all of a sudden, we're doing a little detour here to what we were telling you, Steve. But for those with mature fruit trees, what we've been saying is true. And for a 2-year-old, you may want to exercise a bit more caution about which branches you remove in order to maintain the desirable shape of the tree. And you're going for that vase shape, that champagne glass shape, where the branching is basically going out and into a vase shape to allow for better air circulation and for better sunlight penetration in the middle of the canopy.
And And again, in Chuck Ingall's Home Orchard publication, it says young trees should be pruned fairly heavily and encouraged to grow rapidly for the first 3 years without any fruit. Leave most of the small horizontal branches untouched for later fruiting.
There you go. We'll have a link to the publication Home Orchard in today's show notes. But Steve, enjoy your peach trees. Remember, and nectarines and plums. Remember, they're still in their formative years. But for those of you with mature fruit trees, you prune them when you're thinning the fruit in April, and then in July and August when you harvest the fruit, you prune the trees again, and that way you can have a fruit tree that never gets out of control, and it will require very little winter pruning, and the only reason you do winter pruning would maybe to remove any crossing or rubbing branches that you might see. All right. And also look out for suckers at the base, because most fruit trees are grafted.
Yes, and so the what comes from the base right at the soil line is going to be the rootstock, not going to bear the fruit that you like.
Exactly. Debbie Flower, thanks for your help on this.
You're welcome, Fred.
You've heard me talk about the benefits of Smart Pots, the original award-winning fabric container. Smart Pots are sold around the world and are proudly made 100% right here in the USA. Smart Pots is the oldest and still the best of all the fabric plant containers that you might find. Many of the imitators are selling cheaply made fabric pots that fall apart quickly. Not Smart Pots. There are satisfied Smart Pot owners who have been using the same Smart Pots for over a decade, actually approaching 20 years. When you choose Smart Pot fabric containers, you know you'll be having a superior growing experience with the best product on the market. And your plants will appreciate Smart Pots too. Because of the 1 million microscopic holes in Smart Pots, your soil will have better drainage and the roots will be healthier. They won't be going round and round on the outside of the soil ball like you see in so many plastic pots. The air pruning qualities of Smart Pots creates more branching of the roots, filling more of the usable soil in the Smart Pot. Smart Pots are available at independent garden centers and select Ace and True Value hardware stores nationwide. To find a store near you or to buy online, visit smartpots.com/Fred. And don't forget that /Fred part. On that page are details about how, for a limited time, you can get 10% off your Smart Pot order by using the coupon code FRED. Use it at checkout from the Smart Pot store. Visit smartpots.com/Fred for more information about the complete line of Smart Pots lightweight, colorful, award-winning fabric containers. And don't forget that special Farmer Fred 10% discount. Smart Pots, the original award-winning fabric planter. Go to smartpots.com/Fred. We're here at the Fair Oaks Horticulture Center. It's Harvest Day. It's a big event put on by the Sacramento County Master Gardeners where their gardens are open to the public, where you can see some amazing practical gardens that you can apply to your own situation. There's vegetables, there's grapes, there's an orchard, there's herbs, there's perennials, there's a drought-tolerant garden, and a lot more. You ought to come and see it whenever they have Harvest Day, which is always the first Saturday in August. And speaking of perennials and herbs, one perennial vendor that's always here, Rose Love All Sale from Morning Sun Herb Farm in Vacaville. Rose, I don't know if you've seen it yet since you've been here, but I understand it came from you. Over in the herb garden, it's a tree. It's about a 6-foot tree, but it's shaped like a tree. And I saw it and it was in bloom when I first saw it. And I go, what is that? And one of the master gardeners told me it's lemon verbena. And then she said, here, try this. And she gave me a cookie made with lemon verbena. And it sold me on this plant. And when you think of herbs, you think of little plants. And this one was shaped like a tree.
Yes, lemon verbena. It's native to Peru. It's one of my all-time favorite herbs. I love this plant more than anything.
What USDA zones is it applicable for?
Definitely all the way down to 9, and it's much hardier than people think it is.
Does it die back in marginal climates and come back?
It does. People think it's very tender, but actually we treat it like a rose bush. So it dies all the way back. You cut it back like a rose bush, and it comes back in March, or at least by tax day.
Now, I noticed the one here at the Fair Oaks Horticulture Center has been trimmed as a standard, tree-shaped. That was on purpose, wasn't it?
That was on purpose to keep it up a little higher and to make it look kind of pretty. If you want lots of foliage, then you really want to prune it all the way back like you would a standard rose bush.
Still, though, the blossoms, when it is in bloom, is fabulous.
It is, and it's not really grown for the blossoms, those little white flowers, but it's quite pretty, and it's actually attracted to a lot of insects.
So beneficials, it attracts. The leaves you can use in cooking, and because it does get, if you trim it as a standard, to 5 feet or 6 feet tall or so, it's really a nice focal point for an herb garden.
It's a beautiful standard for an herb garden. It will get 5 to 6 feet tall, and there's one down at Filoli that's about 12 feet tall. It's huge. And I always suggest for people to put it somewhere where they're going to run into it because the fragrance is tremendous.
Now, Filoli is not your typical backyard garden. The Filoli Mansion and Estate, I believe, was the Matson Steamship Line owner that built it and landscaped it, and it's an amazing, amazing garden that only if you win the mega lottery will you be able to afford it.
Yes, if you're on a 0 lot line home or maybe in a small container garden area, you definitely are going to keep it more into a 2 to 4 foot size, which is very doable because once you start using it in your cooking and for your teas, and my all-time favorite thing, to make lemon verbena ice cream, you will be keeping it fairly short because you will use it in your daily cooking.
Well, since you said that, what's the recipe for lemon verbena ice cream?
It's actually pretty simple. It's a cup and a half of cream, a cup and a half of milk, 2/3 to 3/4 cup of sugar, and you bring that up to a fairly warm temperature, not boiling, but fairly warm. You take that off of the heat. You add 3 egg yolks. So you bring the egg yolks, you want to bring them, whisk them a little bit. You use a little bit of that cream mixture. You add it to those whisked egg yolks. Then you add the egg yolks back in to your mixture. You bring it back up to fairly warm temperatures, but you don't want to bring it to boiling. You keep that stirring for about 8 minutes until it becomes thickened. Take it off the heat, add about a cupful of fresh lemon verbena leaves, and then close it down, let it come to room temperature on its own, and then I actually put it in the refrigerator for a day. Then you take those lemon verbena leaves out, squeeze them to bring all that lemon verbena goodness out of it, and then just process it in your ice cream maker and chill it down and eat it. You can tell I make this a lot, the fact that I know the recipe that well.
What's your favorite flavor of ice cream to use with it?
Oh, that's the ice cream. Lemon verbena ice cream. That's all. That is all you need. Although you can add, a little smidgen of peaches, add some fresh peaches with it, and it's wonderful.
Would this recipe happen to be on your website?
It is. If you go to our website, the recipes are listed at the bottom. You can click there, and the lemon verbena ice cream will be on the recipe list. So, yeah, lemon verbena ice cream. I know it by heart.
And the website?
The website, morningsunherbfarm.com.
And you do mail orders, don't you?
We do. We stop mail order during the summer because it's, hot as, Satan's you-know-what right now. But we will start again right after Labor Day. We will be mail ordering for the next couple months after that.
All right. Check it out. Check out their catalog online. Are you still doing tomato testing?
Well, no. But, for example, this year we put 200 tomato plants out. We thought we would have some tomatoes to test. It turns out this year, for the first time in 25 years, the deer thought our tomatoes would be delectable. And so out of the 200 plants, we have about 5 tomato plants that we've been able to harvest from. But the deer are hungry this year. Between the drought, the fire, everything else, we've just decided the deer can have the tomatoes, and we're enjoying the eggplant.
Mornings on Herb Farm in Vacaville, about halfway between Sacramento and San Francisco. Besides the name, obviously, Herb Farm, and you have classes as well.
We have classes that we'll be starting those back up in the fall after COVID. With COVID, we, of course, put a stop to everything. But in the fall, we'll be starting once again with our herb classes and all of our wreath-making classes in October.
Visit the website, morningsunherbfarm.com.
All right. Thank you so much, Fred.
You want to start the backyard fruit and nut orchard of your dreams? but maybe you don't know where to begin. Or maybe you're currently growing fruit and nut trees and you've got a million questions, such as what are the tastiest fruits to grow? Where can I go to buy some of these delectable fruit and nut trees you've been reading about? And then how do you care for all of these trees, including planting, pruning, and harvesting? I've got one online stop in mind for you where all these questions you might have will get answered. It's DaveWilson.com. That's Dave Wilson Nursery, the nation's largest wholesaler of fruit and nut trees for the backyard garden. They have planting tips, taste test results, and links to nurseries in your area that carry Dave Wilson fruit trees. Click on the Home Garden tab at DaveWilson.com for all of these links, including a link to their years of informative videos about growing fruit and nut trees that they've posted on the Dave Wilson Nursery YouTube channel. Start the backyard orchard of your dreams at DaveWilson.com. We're doing some tomato troubleshooting with Don Shore from Redwood Barn Nursery in Davis, California, going through the litany of problems that might affect your tomatoes this summer. And you probably know that tomatoes do best in full sun, but too much sun can be a problem. Now there are some sun-related problems, especially in warmer areas where your plants are getting pummeled by sun all day long. And yes, tomatoes are a full sun crop, but there is such a thing as too much sun, which can result in things like fruit cracking or cat facing or solar yellowing.
Sun scald is that sunburn is the simplest name to apply, and it is directly on the fruit. In the case of the sun scald, it's the fruit that's exposed to the western sky when it's 105 degrees. And some varieties are more susceptible than others, only because some of them have better leaf canopy than others. I've never had sunburn on an ace tomato because the plant has got a nice dense canopy. It's a consistent problem on celebrity for me when I've grown that one because the plant is a relatively unvigorous plant that produces a lot of fruit. So a whole lot of that fruit is exposed to the direct afternoon sun. So there are varietal differences once again. And once you've grown a number of tomatoes, you'll find some of them are just leafier, more vigorous, shade themselves better. Champion does a very good job of shading itself and produces a very large amount of large fruit. And I mentioned celebrity. By comparison, it's a chronic problem on that particular variety for me. So you could, if you want to grow a particular variety that's susceptible to sunburn on the fruit, figure out a way to shade it a little bit from the hot afternoon sun. Maybe rig up a little structure to the west of the plant and put some 50% shade cloth that you buy from a local garden center. Another option might just be to put them where there's a little natural shade, not too much, or just plant varieties that are more dense and leafy. And you'll notice that, again, as with blossom endrite, you'll notice varietal differences over time that will lead you away from some varieties and towards others as you slowly build this collection of your favorite varieties that does well in your particular region.
And it probably would help, too, to keep your pruning shears in their holster because the more leaf cover that it has, less chance there is of sun-related problems.
I would say pruning tomatoes is almost never necessary. And I know that causes some controversy when we say that, but it has very little benefit. If you're taking foliage off and exposing fruit, you're definitely going to get that adverse effect of sunburn on the fruit itself. It reduces yield overall when you prune tomatoes. The only reason I can think of that would be a possible benefit would be in areas where late blight is a real problem. Pruning them to get more open habit so you get better air circulation, but that increases your risk of sunburn. So I would suggest that keeping pruning at an absolute minimum, unless there's some weird training technique you've adopted that absolutely requires it. Pruning is for people in Minnesota, where their season begins on Memorial Day and ends on Labor Day. Here we've got such a long season that we can allow the fruit to set very late in the season. We don't have to prune the vines for size control, and we'll still get plenty of ripe fruit.
There are some yellowing issues with the leaves with some diseases. In fact, if you buy a tomato plant, you may see letters next to the name of the tomato like V, F, or N, or T, or A for that matter. But the V and the F are two problems that can cause a plant to turn yellow, and that would be verticillium and fusarium.
Yeah, those are two problems in our area where we have, these are soil-borne diseases, so they may be in your area if your homes were built on old agricultural soil, or if you bring in soil, inadvertently bringing in the disease with it. One of the reasons I'm always concerned about people getting tomato plants from their fellow backyard gardeners who started the seeds themselves, a lot of home gardeners like to use dirt. Use compost from their own yard as they grow them. Unfortunately, that can be a source of contamination into your yard. So it'd be best if all the gardeners out there who are sharing transplants use packaged soils rather than homemade garden soils. If you get them, it's a real problem. Verticillium and fusarium are very challenging to eliminate, impossible basically to eliminate. And even the rotation practices that we all recommend, that special 3-year rotation of only nightshade plants in this area and then no nightshade plants in this area. Nightshade family is what I'm referring to. Even that's only marginally effective. So your best bet, if you have a problem with verticillium, fusarium, or nematodes, is to look for that VFN on the label. New hybrids, modern hybrids that have verticillium, fusarium, and nematode tolerance built into them. Champion is a good example, but there's a lot of others out there. And that's why you see that on the labels. And East Coast gardeners are now seeing more and more varieties with late blight resistance, which is a nice kind of new wrinkle in the breeding direction.
And the letters T and A refer to a tobacco mosaic virus and
Yep.
Alternaria.
Yep.
And as far as tobacco mosaic virus, don't smoke around your plants.
Yeah, there you go. That one's easy. I've actually never seen a case of tobacco mosaic in my career, so I gather that's more of a greenhouse operation concern. But those resistances that are built into the hybrids are a distinct advantage. This is why when we're talking on your program early in the season about going and selecting your tomato varieties, we both kind of push, get at least a few hybrids in there. You know, they're going to have this resistance bred into them. And I know people love heirloom tomatoes and all, but they don't have that resistance built into them. So diversifying the number of varieties and the types of varieties you're planting can be really important.
And one more problem that may affect your tomatoes, where the lower leaves and stems look kind of bronze or oily brown color, the leaves dry up and drop, that could be russet mites.
That's an interesting one. I've seen it several times, and it's really hard to diagnose from someone's description because they think it just looks like a watering problem. You know, the plant looks like it needs it, not wilting, but like it's sort of drying out from the ground up. I happened to have that problem very early on when I was a gardener here in the valley, so I got it identified. And it looks like it's browning slowly from the ground up the vine. The vine keeps growing with reasonable vigor, keeps flowering, keeps setting, but just sort of steadily declines as the season goes along. It can be a tough one. Oil sprays can be very helpful early in the season. If you've had it one year, you might wish to spray for it the next. The thing, though, is to get it properly diagnosed because it takes a 40-power hand lens to see those little mites. And most nurseries and honestly most master gardeners aren't going to recognize that problem. It's not something they encounter very often. So take some pictures of the plant, get real close with a hand lens and look at the leaf. You might see the russet mite on there. If you have a problem one year, get rid of all the tomato foliage, all the debris at the end of the season. Don't compost it. Send it away. Send it off to the landfill. And watch your plants carefully the next year, or perhaps give them a preventive spray with a light oil as they're beginning to grow. Because it can be a frustrating problem when you get it. By the time you figure out what it is, it might be a little late to do anything about it.
Is there any truth to the old adage, avoid planting tomatoes near petunias and potatoes to avoid russet mites?
Not that I know of. I think petunias look lovely with tomatoes.
We've been doing some tomato troubleshooting with Don Chore, owner of Redwood Barn Nursery in Davis, California. Don, thanks for the tomato tips.
All right. Always great to talk to you, Fred.
Is it hotter, or is it just your imagination? Oh, it's real. Heat waves across the country in the last decade are longer in duration and higher in temperature, and that includes both daytime and nighttime temperatures. And your plants are noticing it too, especially those popular ornamental shrubs that are more at home in milder climates, roses. Have you noticed that the blooms on your roses might be smaller than usual, that they tend to dry up quicker? And how about that rose foliage on the rose bushes? Does it look a little crispier than usual? However, there are some rose varieties that can thrive in the heat, especially if that rose bush is located near a hard surface and it's against a south or west-facing wall where the heat is particularly strong. In the Beyond the Garden Basics newsletter, which comes out Friday, August 12th, Master Rosarian Debbie Arrington talks about those rosebush varieties that can take the heat. Find a link to the newsletter in today's show notes or visit our website, gardenbasics.net, where you can sign up to have the free Beyond the Garden Basics newsletter delivered to your inbox each Friday. Also at gardenbasics.net, you can listen to any of our previous editions of the podcast, as well as read a transcript of the podcast episode you're listening to now. That's at gardenbasics.net. For current subscribers, look for those heat-tolerant rose varieties in the next Beyond the Garden Basics newsletter. Again, coming out Friday, August 12th. It'll be in your email. Take a deeper dive into gardening with the Beyond the Garden Basics newsletter. And it's free. Find the link at gardenbasics.net. Garden Basics with Farmer Fred comes out every Tuesday and Friday, and it's brought to you by Smart Pots and Dave Wilson Nursery. Garden Basics, it's available wherever podcasts are handed out. For more information about the podcast, visit our website, gardenbasics.net, and that's where you can find out about the free Garden Basics newsletter, Beyond the Basics. And thank you so much for listening.